In a world where storms tear down more than just homes, sometimes the greatest rescues come not from humans, but from the silent guardians we never expected. This is not just a story about survival. It's a story of loyalty, memory, and the quiet power of love that refuses to fade. As the philosopher George Eliot once wrote, "What do we live for, if not to make life less difficult for each other?" Stay with us to the very end of this remarkable journey. There is a profound lesson waiting, one that might just change how you see family, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between us all. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who needs hope today. The aftermath of Hurricane Helene left the town of Bayfield, Florida, unrecognizable. Streets once lined with blooming oleanders and neat picket fences were now rivers of mud and debris. Roofs had collapsed, windows shattered, and the salty scent of the nearby Gulf mixed with the damp, heavy smell of destruction. Power lines sagged dangerously low, and the constant hum of emergency generators underscored the eerie silence that blanketed the town. Chloe Bennett stood on the warped wooden porch of the small rental house she had moved into only 3 months ago. It had been meant to mark a fresh start, a quiet life near the sea, where she could heal after a long, painful divorce. She had imagined mornings spent walking along the shoreline and evenings reading under the soft glow of the porch light. But now, the beach was littered with fragments of shattered lives, and the porch light was gone, snapped off by hurricane winds that had howled like wild animals through the night. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the humid August air clung to her skin. It wasn't the weather that chilled her. It was the overwhelming sense of isolation. In Houston, she had friends, neighbors, familiar coffee shops, even the mundane comfort of traffic jams. Here in Bayfield, she had no one. Just the empty shells of homes around her, many abandoned before the storm, and others that now looked unlikely to shelter anyone again. A lump formed in her throat. She had traded loneliness in the city for loneliness by the sea. Maybe, she thought bitterly, that wasn't progress after all. Then, just as she turned to retreat indoors, something caught her eye. A flicker of movement at the far end of the street, where floodwaters still pooled like dark, stagnant lakes. She narrowed her gaze. For a moment, she thought it might be driftwood, or a collapsed shutter being dragged by the wind. But no, the figure moved with purpose, steady and deliberate. A dog. Chloe's breath caught. The animal emerged from behind an overturned trash bin, its body strong and muscular beneath a coat of mottled brown and gray. Mud clung to its fur in heavy clumps, but its posture was regal, almost defiant against the backdrop of devastation. In its powerful jaws, the dog gripped a tattered backpack. The straps were frayed, and the fabric was stained and torn, but whatever was inside weighed it down enough that the dog had to drag it across the pavement with effort. Chloe stepped down from the porch instinctively, curiosity eclipsing her fear. She recognized the dog now. Everyone in Bayfield did. Diesel. He wasn't just any dog. He was a legend, a retired K-9 who had once served with the county search and rescue team. His handler, Frank Dawson, had trained him for years until age and tragedy forced both into early retirement. Since then, Diesel had become a kind of guardian spirit for Bayfield. Though officially a stray now, he had never wandered far from the neighborhood where Frank still lived with his young grandson. Diesel roamed the streets freely, watching over the town's children, alerting neighbors to fires or break-ins, and even once pulling a man from a flood-swollen ditch during a tropical storm 2 years ago. Most thought of Diesel as part of the town itself, untamed, reliable, and deeply loyal. But no one had seen him since Hurricane Helene had struck. Many assumed he had perished in the chaos, swept away by the storm surge or trapped beneath the rubble. And yet, here he was, dragging supplies through the wreckage like some kind of canine courier. Chloe's heart ached at the sight. She had seen dogs in shelters after disasters, fearful, disoriented, their spirits broken. But Diesel moved with clarity and intent. She couldn't explain why, but watching him stirred something deep inside her. A memory surfaced. The day she signed her divorce papers. She had walked out of the courthouse feeling like a discarded page from someone else's story. That sense of being without purpose, without a home. She saw it mirrored now in the battered town around her. But Diesel had purpose. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, following at a respectful distance. Diesel glanced back once but didn't slow his pace or show any fear. It was as if he accepted her silent companionship. They moved together down Cypress Avenue, past homes gutted by wind and water, past cars flipped onto their sides like fallen toys. Chloe noticed that the backpack bore a faint patch, barely legible through the grime, that read, Bayfield County Emergency Supply. Her mind raced. Had Diesel broken into a supply cache? Was he bringing aid to someone in need? As they turned onto a narrower street lined with ancient wind-bent oaks, Chloe's pulse quickened. Each step felt like peeling back layers of her own grief and uncertainty. She was no longer just observing a lost dog. She was part of his mission now, whatever it might be, and deep down, she sensed that Diesel's journey would lead her not only to the remnants of someone else's story, but to the beginning of her own new chapter. The dog paused ahead, his ears perked toward a house partially hidden behind a collapsed fence and a leaning oak. The structure had taken a heavy hit but was still standing. Diesel dropped the backpack on the cracked front step and sat back, his chest rising and falling as he panted heavily. His eyes glowed with a determination Chloe couldn't ignore. In that moment, she knew. Following Diesel wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about belonging. About finding a place where the broken pieces of her past might finally fit together into something whole. And whatever came next, she would walk alongside this silent, steadfast hero who had already carried more than just supplies through the storm. He had carried hope. Diesel paused in front of a battered single-story house at the edge of the street. The roof sagged heavily to one side, as though the walls had been forced to bear more weight than they were ever meant to carry. Shingles lay scattered across the yard, and one of the windows had been crudely patched with plywood. The fence was a collapsed mess, tangled with broken tree limbs and strips of torn tarp. Chloe hesitated at the gate, or what had once been a gate, uncertain whether to follow any farther. Diesel dropped the muddy backpack on the front step and gave a short, muffled bark. Not a warning. More like an announcement. The front door creaked open. An older man stood in the doorway, backlit by the dim glow of a single battery-powered lantern. His frame was sturdy but stooped with age, his shoulders squared in a way that spoke of a life once filled with duty. His hair was silver and thick, and his face was marked with deep lines that seemed carved not just by time, but by sorrow. "Diesel," the man said, voice rough as gravel but threaded with relief. "You came back." Diesel wagged his tail slowly and let out a low, familiar whine. Before Chloe could decide whether to speak or retreat, the man's eyes lifted and settled on her. He seemed surprised but not alarmed. In fact, there was something in his gaze that reminded her of a man who had once worn a uniform, the kind who was trained to assess rather than assume. "You following my dog, miss?" Chloe nodded, stepping cautiously forward. "Yes." "I saw him in the street with that backpack. I didn't mean to intrude, but..." The man waved her off gently. No harm done. If you've been watching over him, you're welcome here. He opened the door wider. Diesel trotted inside without hesitation, leaving the backpack behind. Chloe followed, brushing past the lingering scent of wet earth and storm-battered wood. The living room was simple but orderly, though the ceiling bore water stains and a corner of the floor had buckled. Furniture was pushed away from the windows. A few framed photographs sat clustered together on a single shelf, as if they'd been gathered in a rush before the storm hit. A boy no older than 8 peeked out from a hallway. He had dark brown hair that curled at the ends and wide, cautious eyes. "Is Diesel okay, Grandpa?" "He's fine, Evan," the man answered, his voice softening. "And he brought someone with him." The boy nodded solemnly and retreated down the hallway, as though used to trusting his grandfather's judgment without question. "I'm Frank Dawson," the man said, offering a calloused hand. "And I suppose you've already met the hero of Bayfield." "Chloe Bennett," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I just moved to town a few months ago. I've heard people talk about Diesel, but I had no idea." Frank nodded, motioning toward an old but clean armchair. "Please sit. You look like you've seen as much of the storm as we have." Chloe sat carefully, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. Diesel circled the room, pausing by the shelf of photographs before lying down beside Frank's chair. "You said you'd heard about Diesel," Frank began, resting a hand on the dog's broad back. "But folks around here mostly know the stories. They don't know the whole truth." Chloe leaned forward, sensing this was not just conversation. It was confession. "Years back, Diesel wasn't just any dog. He was my partner. I trained canine units for search and rescue. We were a team for almost 7 years. There wasn't a building collapse, forest search, or hurricane zone we didn't work together." Frank's eyes softened, distant but sharp with memory. "One afternoon, my wife Eleanor was changing a light bulb in the kitchen. Simple as that. The ladder slipped. She fell hard, broke 2 ribs, and knocked herself unconscious. I was out training with another unit. Diesel wasn't even in the house. He was supposed to be resting." His voice thickened. But he wasn't resting. Somehow he sensed something was wrong. He broke through the screen door and got to her. Laid beside her, whining and barking until a neighbor heard and called for help. That dog saved her life. Chloe felt a lump rise in her throat. She glanced at Diesel, who was now watching Frank with eyes that seemed to understand every word. From that day forward, he wasn't just my partner. He was family. Frank paused, gathering himself. 3 years ago, a warehouse fire broke out while Eleanor was volunteering for a community food drive. The roof collapsed. I wasn't there fast enough. Neither was Diesel. We both failed her that day. His hand tightened slightly in Diesel's fur. After that, I quit the force. Couldn't trust myself. Lost my license. Moved here to Bayfield to be closer to my son and grandson. My boy's work takes him all over the state, so it's just me and Evan most of the time. And Diesel. He swallowed hard, the pain of those years still fresh in his voice. Diesel never left. Even when he grew restless, when he wasn't being called to service anymore, he stuck by us. I tried to keep him fenced in, but he always found his way out. Said he was too old for leashes, I guess. Frank chuckled softly, though the sound was brittle. When Hurricane Helena came, Diesel vanished. Broke through the kennel gate. I thought he was gone for good. He motioned toward the muddy backpack still sitting by the door. But he wasn't running away. He was gathering supplies, water bottles, canned food, even that little shirt. Chloe frowned. Shirt? Frank nodded, and reached for the pack. From it, he pulled out a child's t-shirt, damp and stained, but unmistakably familiar. My grandson's. Evan lost it when we had to evacuate. I thought it was gone. Diesel must have found it while he was out. Chloe pressed her hand to her mouth, overcome. He wasn't just scavenging, he was remembering, bringing back what mattered. Frank's eyes met hers, shining with unshed tears. You see, Miss Bennett, Diesel's not just carrying supplies, he's carrying our past, our memories, what's left of the people we've lost. And somehow, even in all this ruin, he's still looking after us. Chloe felt tears sting her own eyes. At that moment, she no longer saw Diesel as just a brave, clever dog. She saw him as something greater, a bridge between loss and healing, a living testament to the bonds that even storms could not break. And deep down, she knew that following Diesel here was no accident. It was the beginning of something neither she nor the Dawsons could have imagined. The days following the storm unfolded in a strange rhythm. Bayfield woke each morning beneath a sky that seemed both fragile and forgiving, pale blue with streaks of silver where clouds had not yet entirely cleared. Though the town bore scars of Hurricane Helena's wrath, life pressed forward in small, determined steps. So did Chloe. She had returned to Frank's house the next morning, armed with nothing more than a hammer, a box of nails, and the quiet determination to be useful. I'm not much of a carpenter, she had admitted sheepishly, but I can hold a ladder and swing a hammer if someone tells me where to aim. Frank had chuckled, the sound easier than the weight he carried in his voice the day before. That's more than enough. Together they worked on patching the roof where shingles had blown away. Chloe balanced on the lower rungs of the ladder while Frank steadied the boards. Diesel remained close, pacing the yard like a sentinel. He would pause every so often to look up at them, eyes sharp and alert, as if assessing their progress. When the physical labor became too demanding for Frank's weathered joints, Chloe took over clearing branches from the yard and gathering the debris that had washed up against the sides of the house. Evan helped where he could, lugging smaller branches into piles and brushing mud from the walkway with a broom nearly as tall as he was. He never strayed far from Diesel's side. By midday, the three of them, 4, counting Diesel, had settled into a comfortable rhythm. But what surprised Chloe most wasn't the ease of the work or the satisfaction of seeing small improvements in the battered home. It was Diesel. As the sun tilted westward and shadows stretched across the yard, Diesel vanished. No fanfare, no farewell bark. He simply trotted off down the street, head held high and ears forward, the same way he had the morning Chloe first followed him. I suppose he's got his own tasks to see to, Frank said, wiping sweat from his brow with a faded handkerchief. Chloe wondered aloud, does he always wander like this? Since the storm, every day. Frank leaned on his hammer thoughtfully. He's got roots, I think, places he checks, and sometimes he brings things back. Frank's words proved true. That evening, as the first stars peeked out in the clearing sky, Diesel returned. In his jaws, he carried a flashlight, mud-caked, but still functional once Chloe rinsed it off and replaced the batteries. The next morning, Diesel came back with a small camping stove, scorched along one side but otherwise intact. By the third day, he dragged home a tangled but repairable extension cord. He's like a collector, Chloe remarked, half in wonder, half in disbelief. No, Frank corrected gently. He's a caretaker. It wasn't just random salvage. As Diesel's deliveries continued, Chloe noticed a pattern. A child's worn sneaker. A family photograph warped by water damage but still recognizable. A man, a woman, and two small children grinning on a beach. A battered radio. A ceramic angel, miraculously unbroken despite the odds. Diesel wasn't gathering supplies. He was gathering memories. Objects that had once belonged to the families who had evacuated, or in some cases, lost their homes entirely. Pieces of lives scattered by the storm and painstakingly reclaimed by a dog who seemed to understand what they meant. The realization struck Chloe with quiet awe. Diesel wasn't just bringing back things. He was bringing back connections. He was the living thread between what had been and what still could be. As the days passed, Chloe found herself becoming a different version of the woman who had stood helplessly on her porch just a week before. She started each morning by checking the neighborhood with Frank, helping neighbors secure tarps over their roofs or carry debris to the curb for collection. When Evan's school remained closed, she read to him on the front porch or played quiet games while Frank rested. And always, Diesel kept watch. Sometimes he would sit at the end of the driveway, eyes scanning the street like a soldier standing guard. Other times, he vanished on his silent missions, returning with new tokens of the community's resilience. One afternoon, Chloe found herself sitting beside Diesel on the steps as the sun dipped low and turned the sky amber. Evan was inside helping Frank sort through a box of rescued books. "I don't know how you do it," she whispered, scratching Diesel behind his ears. "But you've brought back more than things, haven't you?" Diesel leaned into her touch, a quiet rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. She thought of the photo he had retrieved, the smiling family she didn't know. Somewhere, those people were missing that picture, perhaps thinking it had been swallowed by the storm forever. Maybe, with Diesel's help, they could get it back. The thought stirred something in her. Purpose. It had been so long since Chloe had felt it. Since the day she had walked out of the courthouse with her divorce finalized, she had existed rather than lived. Moving to Bayfield had been a step toward healing. But until now, she hadn't truly understood what healing meant. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about rebuilding, reclaiming what storms, both literal and personal, had tried to take away. As evening deepened, Frank joined her on the steps, lowering himself carefully beside her. "You've been good for Evan," he said quietly. "And for me." "I think Diesel's the one doing the real work," Chloe replied. Frank chuckled. "Maybe, but even heroes need a team." Chloe smiled, a genuine warmth blooming in her chest. For the first time in what felt like years, she no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She was part of something again. A family, even if it wasn't defined by blood or legal ties. A family formed by shared struggle, quiet strength, and the steady, unwavering loyalty of a dog who understood that healing wasn't just about survival. It was about remembering, and about finding new beginnings hidden within the remnants of the past. The week after Hurricane Helena passed brought a deceptive calm. The skies cleared, the sun shone bright, and Bayfield's residents dared to believe the worst was over. But storms had a cruel way of leaving hidden dangers in their wake. By Thursday, a slow, heavy rain began to fall. The saturated earth, already weakened by the hurricane's floods, had little strength left to hold itself together. Hillsides softened. Roots loosened their grip. The threat of a landslide loomed over the neighborhood's edge, where an old, disused storage shed sat at the base of a slope. It was a place where local kids often gathered to trade baseball cards or share secrets, just far enough from prying adult eyes to feel adventurous, yet close enough to be considered safe. Until now. That afternoon, Evan had gone off to play with two friends, with promises to return before dusk. Chloe had seen him leave with a raincoat too big for his frame, and Diesel trotting faithfully behind. "He's safer with Diesel than he is with me," Frank had joked, though his brow creased with habitual worry. Hours passed. The rain fell harder. Then came the phone call from a frantic parent. The children hadn't returned. Chloe's heart raced as she grabbed her jacket. Frank's face went pale, his years etched deeper by fear. "They were headed toward the old shed," he murmured. "That slope." Before he could finish, Chloe had already pulled out her phone and called emergency services. The operator promised a team would be dispatched immediately, but the situation worsened by the minute. A massive tree had fallen across the only clear road leading toward the shed. Rising water pooled around it, making passage impossible for vehicles. As Chloe and Frank stood near the flooded street, searching for another way forward, Diesel suddenly bounded out of the shadows. His coat dripped with rain and mud, but his eyes burned bright with urgency. He barked once, sharp, commanding, and then took off toward a narrow footpath that wound behind the neighboring yards. Without hesitation, Chloe followed. Frank, though slower, came behind them. The path was treacherous, slick with mud and strewn with debris. Diesel led the way confidently, pausing now and then to ensure they kept pace. They reached the crest of the hill just as the ground below shuddered with a deep, ominous groan. The slope was beginning to give way. At the bottom, the shed leaned dangerously to one side, its frame buckling. And through a gap in the warped door, Chloe glimpsed 3 terrified faces. Evan, 2 other boys. They were trapped. "Stay back," Frank called, his voice hoarse. "The ground's too unstable." But Diesel didn't hesitate. He charged down the slope, powerful muscles rippling beneath his soaked fur. Mud slid beneath his paws, but he kept his footing, his instincts sharp, despite the chaos. Reaching the shed, Diesel nosed open the door with careful strength. Evan's small hands clung to Diesel's neck immediately. "Good boy," Chloe breathed, tears mingling with the rain on her face. Diesel barked twice, sharp and deliberate, urging the boys to follow. One by one, he guided them out, pressing close to steady their steps across the treacherous ground. He nudged Evan first, then the others, leading them to a patch of higher ground where a cluster of oak roots offered support. The rain intensified. The hillside moaned again, and a section of earth gave way with a wet, sickening crack. The shed collapsed entirely, but Diesel and the boys were clear. Just as the search and rescue team arrived, hauling ropes and emergency gear, Chloe saw Diesel standing over the boys like a sentinel. His sides heaved with exertion, and a gash along his foreleg oozed blood, but his stance never wavered. The team took over, securing the children and helping them climb to safety. As Evan was lifted up, he looked back and called, "Come on, Diesel." Diesel tried to move but faltered, exhaustion and injury catching up to him. Chloe bolted down the slope, heedless of the mud. She reached Diesel's side, wrapping her arms around his broad neck. "You did it," she whispered fiercely. "You brought them back." With help from 2 rescue workers, she guided Diesel up the hill to where Frank waited, his face a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. Once everyone reached level ground, applause broke out among the gathered neighbors. Some cried openly. Others simply stood in awed silence. This wasn't the first time Diesel had risked his life for the people of Bayfield. But once again, he had chosen to be a hero. Not because anyone commanded him, not because of training or duty. Because that was who he was, a protector, a memory keeper. And now, a savior, once more. The rain had finally subsided. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the air smelled fresh, not of damp earth and destruction, but of salt and sunlight. The ground was still soft, scarred by mudslides and fallen trees, but hope had taken root amidst the ruin. Word of Diesel's heroic rescue spread quickly, rippling through Bayfield like a wave of light after long darkness. By the next evening, the townspeople gathered in the park at the heart of the community. What had once been a soccer field was now bordered by piles of debris waiting for pickup, but nobody seemed to care. They strung up strings of lights powered by gas generators, casting a warm, golden glow across folding tables lined with salvaged chairs and mismatched benches. Neighbors brought whatever food they could spare: coolers of sandwiches, foil pans of casseroles, baskets of fruit, and desserts that had survived both the storm and the power outages. Someone rolled a grill into the center of the field, the scent of grilled chicken and vegetables mingling with the salty breeze. It wasn't a fancy event, but it didn't need to be. It was a celebration. And at the center of it all stood Diesel. Frank had washed him gently that morning, careful to avoid the wound on his leg that the veterinarian had stitched. The old pit bull looked regal, despite the bandage wrapped around his foreleg, his head held high as if he understood the gathering was for him. Children approached shyly at first, offering treats and soft pats on his broad shoulders. Diesel accepted each with quiet grace. The rescue team arrived in uniform. Captain Morales, a woman with weathered hands and kind eyes, presented Diesel with a custom-made collar bearing a silver medallion engraved with the words, "Bayfield's Guardian." As the crowd applauded, Chloe felt a swell of pride rise in her chest, not just for Diesel, but for the town itself. These were people who had lost roofs, homes, even family heirlooms, but they had not lost their courage or kindness. Frank stood beside Diesel, one hand resting on the dog's sturdy back. He cleared his throat, and the crowd gradually fell silent. "I've lived in Bayfield for nearly 20 years, Frank began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. In that time, I've seen hurricanes come and go. I've seen houses rebuilt and lives changed. But what I witnessed this past week reminded me of something I thought I'd forgotten." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of neighbors and strangers alike. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stay. The people who show up when it matters. Diesel has always known that. Long before I did. He nodded toward Chloe. "And I want to thank someone else who reminded me of that lesson. Chloe Bennett." Chloe felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. She swallowed hard, suddenly self-conscious. "Chloe came to Bayfield looking for a new start," Frank continued. "She didn't expect to find herself patching my roof or chasing after my dog, but she did. She became part of our family without ever asking for anything in return." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was heartfelt. Several people nodded or smiled warmly at Chloe. Faces that had once been strangers but now felt familiar. In that moment, she no longer felt like the newcomer. She was home. As the evening wore on and the sun dipped below the horizon, strings of lights blinked against the gathering dusk. Evan led a group of children in a game of tag, Diesel trailing after them protectively despite his injury. Chloe stood beside Frank, watching the scene with quiet contentment. "I was thinking," she said softly, "Diesel has done so much more than rescue people. He's connected us. He's brought this whole town together." Frank nodded. He always had a talent for that. What if we built on that? Chloe's eyes sparkled with inspiration. What if we started a program? Something to train dogs like Diesel? Not just for search and rescue, but to help the elderly, the disabled, people living alone. Frank raised his eyebrows, considering. A canine community program? Yes. Chloe's voice strengthened. The Bayfield Canine Community. We can recruit trainers, foster dogs in need of purpose, We've already seen how much good Diesel can do. Imagine what a whole team could accomplish." Frank smiled, the weight of years lifting from his face. "I think that's the best idea I've heard in a long time." The next day, with support from the rescue team, local businesses, and countless volunteers, Chloe and Frank drafted the plans for the Bayfield K9 Community Program. By week's end, the first training sessions were scheduled. And at the center of the program's logo, a silhouette of Diesel, head held high, standing proud against the outline of the Bayfield shoreline. From that day forward, Diesel wasn't just a hero of Bayfield. He was the heart of a growing family. A full year had passed since Hurricane Helena swept through Bayfield. The town had changed. Homes once crumbled by wind and water now stood proud and repaired. New paint covered old scars. The school's playground, where Evan and his friends gathered after class, had a new swing set funded by local donations. Even the trees, stripped bare by the storm, had started to grow new branches, leaves unfurling like green flags of victory. But some things had changed in quieter, gentler ways. Diesel, once the powerful K9 who had guided Chloe through the ruins of her old life into the promise of a new one, was no longer running rescue routes or leading children away from danger. Age had caught up with him. His muzzle had turned silver, and he moved with a stiffness that made every step deliberate. Yet, in many ways, Diesel had become more important than ever. He was no longer just a protector. He was a symbol. The Bayfield K9 Community Program, once just a shared dream between Chloe and Frank, had flourished. What began with training a single rescue dog now included a small fleet of service animals. They assisted the elderly, visited hospitals, and offered companionship to those living alone. Some even participated in search and rescue exercises when needed. At the center of it all stood Diesel, the first and greatest of Bayfield's guardians. His story was told everywhere. In classrooms, teachers shared Diesel's bravery as part of lessons about community and courage. In churches, his loyalty was described alongside parables of faith and perseverance. Local news stations ran annual segments, revisiting how one dog had united a town, not just through heroic acts, but through daily reminders of resilience and love. Chloe had started an annual tradition called Diesel's Day. Held in early spring, just as the magnolia trees bloomed, it was a day when the entire community gathered in the park. There were games and food, of course, but the heart of the celebration was simple and profound. Children and seniors alike stood before neighbors and visitors to share stories of the animals that had helped them through life's storms, literal and metaphorical. Some spoke of dogs who had alerted them to medical emergencies. Others told of cats who had kept them company through loss and loneliness. A few shared memories of beloved pets lost to time, honoring how those companions had left lasting imprints on their lives. Every year, Diesel sat at the front of the crowd, a special blanket beneath him to cushion his aging joints. Evan always held the leash, though by now everyone knew Diesel needed no restraint. He would never stray. This year's Diesel's Day felt especially poignant. The sky was clear, the grass vibrant, and the faces around Chloe reflected not just gratitude, but a quiet understanding. They had all survived something together. Frank stood beside her, healthier than he had been the year before. His physical therapy had strengthened his body, but Chloe knew it was the purpose he had rediscovered that had truly healed him. Evan, taller now, stood with a hand resting gently on Diesel's broad back. Chloe stepped to the microphone, the same one used for every Diesel's Day gathering. She took a breath and looked out over the people of Bayfield. Many she now knew by name. Some had become close friends. A few had become family in all the ways that mattered. "When I first came to Bayfield," she began, I didn't think I belonged. I thought starting over meant leaving everything behind. But Diesel taught me otherwise. She paused, letting the soft breeze carry her words. He taught us all that family isn't just about blood. It's about the ones who stand beside us, the ones who don't leave, no matter the storms. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. She turned to look at Diesel, whose amber eyes met hers with a wisdom that felt almost human. And even as he grows older, Diesel continues to remind us that the love we give and the courage we show live on long after our strongest days are behind us. Chloe stepped aside as Evan led Diesel forward. The crowd applauded, not the wild, thunderous applause of a sports game, but the deep, resonant clapping of people honoring a life well lived. Frank rested his hand on Chloe's shoulder. He's not just our hero anymore. He's our legacy. Chloe nodded, emotion tightening her throat. Looking at Diesel, she didn't just see the past, the rescues, the reunions, the silent comfort he had offered her in her loneliest moments. She saw the present, a community thriving, children learning about loyalty and kindness, neighbors supporting one another not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And she saw the future, new generations growing up with Diesel's story as a guiding light, teaching them that even when the world breaks apart, hope can be carried forward by those willing to bear its weight. As the sun dipped low and Diesel settled contentedly at Evan's feet, Chloe whispered the words that had become her truth. Family is not about blood. Family is about who stays, in the storms and after. The evening air was soft, touched by the faint scent of salt drifting inland from the Gulf. The breeze was warm but gentle, rustling the magnolia leaves overhead and carrying the quiet hum of cicadas across the neighborhood. Chloe sat on the front porch of Frank's house, the same house where, a year earlier, she had first followed Diesel and stepped into a new chapter of her life. Tonight, the porch was more than wood and nails. It was a gathering place for family, both old and new. Frank sat in his usual chair, a lightweight blanket draped over his knees. Evan lounged beside him, a notebook open on his lap, though he had long since stopped writing, and was now watching the horizon where the last streaks of sunlight faded into twilight. Diesel rested at Chloe's feet. His head lay gently across her legs, eyes half closed in a state of calm that came not just from age but from purpose fulfilled. His fur, once a deep brindle, had grown lighter around his face and chest, the silver blending into the brown like soft brush strokes of time. Every few moments his tail thumped against the porch floor, a slow, content rhythm. The canine program had grown beyond what any of them had first imagined. Chloe now spent her days coordinating training sessions and community outreach, helping both people and dogs find new purpose. Frank worked as an advisor, his experience shaping the next generation of handlers. And Evan had become the youngest ambassador for the program, speaking to other children about what it meant to care for and trust animals. But tonight was not about plans or progress. Tonight was about memory. "Grandpa?" Evan's voice broke the stillness, soft but eager. "Do you think I could tell Diesel's story to my class next week? Mrs. Tucker said we should share a story that taught us something important." Frank smiled. His eyes, though weathered and wise, glistened with the sheen of unshed tears. "I think you should," he replied, his voice steady despite the lump Chloe could hear beneath it. "But not just because it's about a dog who saved people. It's about how memory and love can outlast even the hardest storms." Evan nodded solemnly, as though accepting a great responsibility. Chloe reached down, threading her fingers gently through Diesel's fur. "He'd like that," she whispered. Diesel's ears twitched at the sound of his name. He let out a quiet, satisfied huff, shifting just enough to press closer to Chloe's side. The stars began to emerge, one by one, bright against the darkening sky. Somewhere down the street, a child's laughter rang out, a reminder that life continued, resilient and joyful. Chloe leaned back, letting the moment settle into her heart. It struck her how much had changed since she first arrived in Bayfield. Back then, she had believed that starting over meant erasing the past, leaving behind the memories of a failed marriage, the ache of isolation, the fear of never belonging again. But she had been wrong. She had learned, through Frank, through Evan, and especially through Diesel, that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about honoring what came before while building something new. The lessons Diesel had taught were not just about bravery or loyalty. They were about continuity, about how love, once given, didn't fade. It echoed through actions, through stories, through the quiet moments when family gathered without the need for words. Frank cleared his throat gently. "You know," he began, "when Eleanor and I first adopted Diesel, I thought we were giving him a home." He smiled, gaze distant but warm. "But really, he gave us one. He kept us together when things were hard. He reminded me of what mattered. Even after Eleanor was gone, Diesel carried her memory forward. And now, he's done the same for this whole town." Chloe felt tears prick her eyes. She wasn't alone in that. Even Evan's young face bore the shadow of understanding far beyond his years. Diesel stirred again, shifting his weight slightly, as though he understood every word. "You've given everything, haven't you, old boy?" Frank said softly. "And now it's our turn to carry on." Chloe nodded. "We'll keep telling your story. We'll keep helping others. That's your legacy." Diesel let out a low, contented rumble. For a long moment, they all sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars multiply overhead. The burdens of the past felt lighter, not because they had disappeared, but because they had been shared. Finally, Evan spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "When I tell Diesel's story, I'm going to say that he didn't just rescue people from floods and mudslides. He rescued them from being alone, from giving up." Chloe smiled, brushing a hand through Evan's curls. "That's exactly right." As if in agreement, Diesel lifted his head briefly, surveying his family, the family he had chosen and protected. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry both peace and permission, he laid his head back down. In that quiet, Chloe felt the last remnants of her old life fall away. Not forgotten, but embraced as part of the journey that had led her here. Family, she realized, was not defined by blood or circumstance. It was defined by those who stayed. In the storms, and after, Diesel had stayed. And through the stories they would continue to tell, he always would. As the stars gathered above Bayfield, Diesel's legacy did not end with the passing of years or the fading of memories. It lived on in every life he touched and every story shared. As Maya Angelou wisely said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Diesel made an entire town feel seen, safe, and loved. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support brings us closer to our first 1,000 subscribers, a milestone that inspires us to create even more meaningful and uplifting stories. What does loyalty mean to you? Share your thoughts below. Let's honor Diesel's lesson together.